content of this podcast is produced for entertainment purposes only and is for informational and educational use. It does not constitute financial or investment advice. You should not make any financial decisions based on the information provided without consulting a qualified professional. All opinions expressed are solely those of the host and guest and do not reflect the views of any company or organization. The hosts and or guests may currently own, have previously owned, or intend to own securities discussed in the content. The content produced here belongs to Daniel Andrea of 18 Degree Journal. It cannot be reproduced or used without prior permission. We do not wish for this content to be used for AI training and do not give such permissions. Memo on the changing dynamics between software and AI. April 2026. My 2 cents in the evolving debate on the future of software. Hello everyone. Hope everyone is doing well, and for those celebrating this week and the next, happy holidays to you. Also, hopefully not getting too sick of my content here. It is now almost 1 year since we began having a Substack here at 18 Degree Journal, and what a year it has been. We now have almost 100 subscribers. I guess we will soon have to follow this with the unofficial rules of Substack of publishing an acknowledgement note. So we have readers from over 25 different nations and with over 150 regular unique readers. So please, thank you so much for each and every one of you for your support, attention, and feedback. I appreciate you being part of the 18 Degree Journal, and I'm excited for the improved content for years to come, as well as the connections we're making along the way. So thank you again, and to many more years ahead. Back to the topic at hand. The last couple of months have introduced many stimulating discussions and debates about the future of AI technologies and how they may shape our lives. There was a big debate on whether the SaaS, software as a service business will be competed away, debates about the replacement of engineers as well as some other roles, fears over growing CapEx spending for the megascalers with Oracle's credit default swaps spiking in rates, and I'm sure you can extrapolate all the other growing fears in the industry. So I decided to try to add a little bit to the conversation to first capture how I'm feeling today in April of 2026, to avoid any future biases impacting my worldview, and also to gauge how wrong or right I am. I think the field has been changing at an exponential rate, and the human brain struggles to keep up with this changing dynamics. Most of the growing fears surfaced with the release of the December 2025 models, and with professionals adopting AI, seeing huge jumps in performance and efficiency. Now, being able to predict, or perhaps overpredict, how it may affect us in the future. I think from the get-go, it's good to establish that it's very hard to see how this field will grow, change, or whether it may bottleneck. The future, as always, is certainly mysterious. But I'm of a strong belief that humans, in any time period, have unifying characteristics. And we may be able to use a few of these arguments. We may be able to make a few arguments with this in perspective. As for any experience I may have, some readers will know I have a bachelor's in software engineering and have had the pleasure of working in the industry for years. Granted, not a whole lot in the grand scheme of things, but I have had the pleasure of touching a few technological sectors, interacting with many senior minds and debating this AI revolution, not to mention using these newfound tools now on a daily basis. Although my points may be naive, I still have a strong, I can still bring forth my current understanding to the discussion. So I think the term AI has been thrown around a bit too loosely lately. And for this article, I want to mention anytime I say AI or the protagonist or technology in that sense, I'm referring to the generative AI technologies such as LLMs. To better, let's say, constrain the conversation, I will break down each point into some problems or sub-questions the generative AI is facing or trying to solve, and how I may have some issues or questions about how it may look like in the future. I feel otherwise then the topics become open-ended, we start getting wishy-washy, and there's no real framework of understanding or a systemized way of wrapping this around in my head. So my first one, I think it's a good way to start the tone of the conversation and addressing the foundational question of how we communicate. And the question being, what do we want? Or, to be more precise, how do we convey our requests, vision, goals, contain them in a box so that we may be able to produce it? To show a small issue an AI could have with this, I'll take you back to my university days. I remember when I was still in university, I took a requirements engineering course. This course centers around how to produce requirements documents, aka documents that encompasses the client's request to produce a product. The hardest part of the class, and the biggest glaring warning the professor would emphasize, is that most of the time your client doesn't yet fully know what they want, not to mention not being able to communicate it properly. Moreover, there are numerous other issues that come with working with clients, such as scope creep, when expected product scope keeps containing more and more features, changing requirements, miscommunication, etc. These lessons and insights carried over to my personal experiences, whether it was producing software for clients, working with managers within an organization, or even working on a personal project. Oops. Now, we introduced a new abstraction level for natural language AI that takes your plain English requests and determines the right coding language abstraction to produce your vision. Who's to say that you asked for is the right thing? There's a lesson that most computer science software engineers learn early, is that the computers by essence are not smart. They do not know what to do unless you tell them what to do and exactly how to do it. The current Gen AI is a lot more sophisticated than this understanding, but at the end of the day, it still relies heavily on proper communication to get your mission across. Who is to say this vision you present is accurate, or is the different level of abstraction capturing what you needed? Steve Jobs famously said, "People don't know what they want until you show it to them." A Gen AI that is prompting to act by a user is not meant to overreach and create a new vision. It is there to find the average best representation of what you have described at the time you described it. Also, to come back to my main point on customers introducing new visions that dilute requirements or evolve a product into some sort of mutation of the original idea, a Gen AI is not really meant to be pushing back against the production. Yes, you can put guardrails, question about priorities, etc., but all of this is useless if a client can override and force their way. True with live engineers, but I don't think it's quite the exact same. Now, to see if we can nail down this communication vision layer, my next question that really arises is the question, if something goes wrong or is not as expected, who's responsible for it? Say we purchase a product from a vendor or have an internal team make a product. When things go wrong, there's always a responsible party, one that will take the heat, try to fix the issue, or in some cases, take the downfall for the issue. Sadly, human structures, essentially in private sector, lead to people getting the short end of the stick. Now, we can argue that a person who delegates a task to the AI, the creator of the AI, or perhaps the vendor of the AI takes the blame. But I think this structure would not be sustainable, and management and the firm will want more layers of responsibility. For some to selfishly protect themselves from the blame. The reality for many enterprises, especially software enterprises, lives in an ecosystem of a lot of different moving and evolving parts, and something constantly changes in a way that will break your system, especially if you have technical debt, and everyone has technical debt. And issues are completely unavoidable, especially with malicious actors always trying to break into things. I'm having a lot of trouble seeing an automation of a lot of processes because I can't map out the responsibility question and a way around of any of the social fragile of corporation structures. Other than the responsibility and blame game, I think Gen AI systems introduce non-deterministic problems that are a lot harder to audit, reproduce, or find the component to blame. Since Gen AI itself is not consistent, aka not the exact same output, it introduces a novel issue of not being able to reproduce all issues in the systems found. In my view, this could add another level of existing blame game dynamics. Now, I think the conversation about Gen AI, especially today, requires a look at what risks and compromises you accept when using it exclusively. When using Gen AI technology, such as an LLM, you're essentially working with a large collection of data, trying to find the most probable output for each request. This process itself is a collection of statistical problems, and the output varies in a way that is statistically bounded but not guaranteed, meaning that you are likely to generate the same or similar output, but you will not necessarily get it. I'm going to better illustrate this. There's an image in the article if you want to check it out, but you're working within a frame of a bell curve. Engineers are working hard to shift your average output as much as possible towards quality, while reducing variance. However, the whole driver of improved LLM output has been a driver for large models with larger context window, according to recent studies I read, having a strong positive correlation with models So I'll say having a strong positive relation with the model size and model output. And this means these huge foundational model built largely on global internet data are exposed to not the best quality of information, increasing the difficulty to improve the average of average internet data. On top of that, you are a significant bottleneck in your ability to utilize these tools to their best potential in order to even guarantee the best possible output to generate from them. I think we all notice that people use Gen AI in different capacities and with different levels of understanding. I think the current ladder framework, ladder framework is best in grouping different classes of users. So let's say level 1 users. Use chat functions, question and answers format, conventional use, answers questions, casual prompting, treats Gen AI mostly like a search engine. A level 2 user will use LLMs for task delegations, use it to draft documents, summarize content, or generate various other content such as emails, Excel files, reports. Usually this user is more familiar with the basic and it maybe improves their prompts with proper prompting and formatting as well as double checking their output, but they're still not quite there yet. A level 3 user uses Gen AI workflow for integration. They embed AI into the process such as advanced autofill like code completion using tools, APIs, and chain prompts. Think about output critically. They know how to set the domain of the model and context to shift the curve towards their domain and catered output. It's someone who's informed about the limitations of the output and tries to minimize output pitfalls. Then we have level 4 users. They use different agentic autonomous processes, multi-step pipelines, coding agents, building systems with AI, understanding limitations deeply, and are consistently experimenting with better utilization techniques. They know how to create systematic approaches to generate output and set limits to this context. Of course, the last level, before of course being the developer of this AI, is level 5, the pro users. They know how to do fine-tuning, architecture of their model, they shape the model itself, use their own custom data sets, specialize in deployments, and borderline experts to create their own very own AI gen tools. Of course, now this model of understanding the different levels of users is not all encompassing, and it has its own limitations as a framework to understand the different categories of users. But the framework allows us to understand that there are levels to using Gen AI, and most users are not maximizing their potential output when using these models or tools. When this leads me to think is how averse most corporations are to change, especially when the status quo works. So it's very hard for me to imagine a huge incentive for average workers and organizations to optimize using these tools to actually achieve the best possible results they can. Along the same lines, you may have noticed that more services are likely facing significant downtime, especially those services that are relying on AI automation and are making some reliability mistakes. Part of the problem stems from how these tools are applied, but the majority of users operate these tools well below the level needed to extract consistent, high-quality output. The majority of professions who have transitioned to using Gen AI tools operate them at level 1 to 2. The other parts, without getting too much tremendous detail, is the structural ceiling given by context windows and LLMs, prioritizing contexts in the context window. For its part, and practical purposes, the majority of the best output in Gen AIs is to produce within a very limited scope, a small problem. And once a large complex problem is introduced, the output seems to fall short. The LLM's probabilistic nature currently prevents it from handling large complex problems. I think this issue is deeply connected to the fact that they are only limited to the average output of the dataset code you're trained in containing bad code. Your average output is contradicted by the ratio of the good to bad code, and with plenty of bad quality samples, it anchors your average output. Many of the best lines of code are written by fanatic, amazing engineers whose output is incomparable to the averages. This is a good reason that top performance engineers are sometimes paid more than CEOs. And there's a graph in the original letter kind of showing the different ways and how you can shift the curve. So please do check it out if you're curious. So I've been discussing this frontier of Gen AI tools, but what might the future hold for them? Well, I have a strong conviction that as this field progresses, the current Gen AI tools will converge more and more towards a similar experience and output. So today, having frontier companies such as Anthropic, OpenAI, Google, Qwen from Alibaba, Kimi, Mistral, etc., are all training on the biggest data sets we have, which is the internet, or in some cases, on each other. Summarization or structural on internet data. The difference factor is how they fine-tune and optimize their models is very limited. And with the ability to replicate any secondary toolkit, the competition will, over time, converge into an undifferentiated product. Even today, anecdotally, many users are sticking to one or two products and are not incentivized to switch, as the product themselves are not that different. Now, with that out of the way, say we agree for a moment that development works and other automated works do get automated on the software side. Is it no longer viable to build any software business or products? Well, I'll leave my comments about the SaaS business model for the next section, but for development, I want to say that it may not be dead, but it just might not have different priorities. A user who has been using AI for almost the beginning of its public release, I can confidently identify AI elements on websites, in writings, and in general, content creation. And if we extrapolate this commoditization of models and the automation of creation product, I think everyone will return to these first principle software and other programs. We still very much exist, but the prioritization of kind of the Steve Jobs artist factor, the ability to build unique, differential experiences, will become the dominant factor driving the industry. On the internet, worry of whether AI will make the art, there's this worry or meme that there's a worry that AI will make the art while the humans will wash the dishes. But I'm of a strong opinion that over time, a human element of taste, art, and fashion will drive the next wave of production uses. In a world where function gets commoditized by generative AI, the user feeling of a product's uniqueness will be the main selling target. And well, that and perhaps some of the network effects that you have if you have more people on the platform already using the platform, driving more users. But again, I think this taste and art feeling is severely overlooked. Recently, I listened to a great podcast that I do recommend every day, and Sarah cannot recommend them enough. He had Jimmy Lovin as a guest. And in the episode, Jimmy made an excellent point that AI is enabling the mediocre to be better. But the true artists, the tastes with tastes and skill, they will excel regardless of the environment. And I think this is the case with the new technology. The true artists will enable by this technology revolution. The commoditization might happen to the functionality part of the product, but not with the experiences. Why I don't believe that this creativity can be automated away? Well, Gen AI systems are trained on datasets of past history. To use a cliche, they are always looking in the rearview mirror and can only synthesize from what was already produced. Yeah, you can tweak parameters and induce hallucination to create behavior, but it is still a statistical recombination, in contrast to a true artist who creates from genuine feeling, often without logic or any justification, has a competitive advantage that no autonomous system can replicate. And maybe my last example that I want to bring, and I promise I'll move on from this point, but there's a lot of similarities or echoes from this AI vibe coded software and the situation of the video game market back in the 80s. In the 80s, once video games were shown to be a profitable enterprise in the market became flooded with cheap, bad products that would prioritize vendors to sell as many video games as possible, not prioritizing their quality, but just getting them out, getting them sold, and a lot of times even selling lemons. This was all until, and then after this boom, most consumers walked away from video games, especially home consoles, because they believe that it's a dead market, it's toys, there's no quality, it's just a bunch of garbage. This all changed and kind of rejuvenated the whole industry was when Nintendo came back. They brought the exact same kind of similar principles, but they had a special tweak where they had the Nintendo seal of approval. So if you bought a game from them, you knew it was quality. You knew you were not buying a lemon. And I think there'll be a similar kind of aspect that will happen with this software. I think as more and more AI garbage right now is flooding networks, getting different products, I think the products with the good reputational standing and those that build really on a brand will outlast the last of time and will actually ride this wave coming out stronger than they came into it. The quality of the product will continue to thrive, and the average vibe coded product will slowly die. Well, I think that we covered a lot of the main points I wanted to touch on before getting onto the hottest topic that was of February. Whether the SaaS business model is dead or gone, or perhaps restructured. Again, we're circling back to the arguments above about the commoditization of software, but here I want to take a slightly different angle. Also, I'll probably in one more form or another repeat some of the points I made already, so please bear with me. I think there's a disconnect between people's understanding why the SaaS business model grew so fast and why it hasn't really been disrupted by other models. So when we think traditionally, when a company wanted to develop a feature or a function, they would invest in an expensive, slow process with a dedicated team to develop that product for each and every feature they needed. This also means a dedicated developer to maintain that one functionality, improve it, and take responsibility for it. SaaS abstraction solved this by allowing a business to come in, take on that specific feature, build, maintain on it, and sell that same solution across multiple businesses, and therefore bringing the per business costs, service costs down, and each incremental client essentially creating margin for them. Again, the process of developing software, especially a feature or function to maintain it for one client, is expensive and a very low margin business. But going out and selling the same or very similar solution from one company to the next, to the third, to the fourth, is really where you make the money happen. So if we not take back and teams managing and now creating their own functions, you're bringing it back to the time where it was more expensive, where it wasn't centralized, where each company had to allocate resources for each function or functionality. It's very similar, even if they bring the per seed Gen AI seeding, you're replacing essentially quality or an output of a function and substituting one subscription for another. Although people forget that, tokens can be also limiting and you can get things that go wrong and the expertise needed to maintain it, but that's regardless. To completely replace it, I think, is ludicrous. You're forgetting about the other parts, the accountability, the trust and assurances of existing solutions, the human's aversion for change, for now entrusting yourself with new accountants who have very limited reputation. Furthermore, we're forgetting that existing SaaS companies have the exact same access to this Gen AI tools, and they can systematically try to bring their own costs down. And perhaps, the SaaS business model has lower margins in the future as they pass on savings to consumers. But I can't say that the business will be gone or dead. It just doesn't make sense. So these have been a lot of the ideas I'm presenting. I've been kind of mulling them over. Hopefully it made sense. I've been kind of jumping from place to place. I do want to talk about a few non-connected topics. So I've been trying to wrap my head around whether or not Gen AI models will run locally or not. So if we look today, both solutions exist. Heck, I'm writing this article and recording it on my MacBook. And even today, I can run a small to medium model all by itself, enough for any level 1 to level 3 users, and maybe pushing it for a level 4 user. And I've worked on industrial grade GPUs that can really fly through a lot of these local models. The capacity, of course, is not super cheap and comes with its own limitations. But the fact that we're able to already run very decent local models and tools foreshadow that in our future, it might become a regularity. However, when I extrapolate this and try to imagine how the future might look, I am troubled by the physics that may make local models less meaningful or for professionals, aka your phone, watch, non-fully built desktop PC, or even notebook. So far, scaling laws have been pretty fairly and ambiguous. Larger models produce meaningful better output, and the energy and physical surface area to disperse that output and heat has been in favor of data center capacity. Give me 1 second. Sorry. Onto the one of course. Capacity, of course, is not cheap, so I did mention that. Sorry, I just lost my train of thought. So the requirements have produced the output to consistently favor data centers, so infrastructure over local hardware. The smaller components and the more power they need to produce the same output. Physics and thermodynamics dictate that the immense amount of headroom would be required for the chip, and I can't imagine the hardware cost of a small, perfectly modulated component will be in comparison to a larger chip with a similar characteristics. So, if we take an extreme example of having a local M on a watch, right? The watch hardware hits a ceiling determined by heat dispersion and die size, limiting what you can physically put in it. And the argument that we can make is you need to place is that small chip in such a watch does not really make sense. Say if we take the exact same example with the watch, but instead of doing the, we'll call it local AI, it then pings the server with its requests and gets a response back. I think the latency question, or whether how long it takes for your watch to communicate with the server and get the response back, is negligible. It'll take only a couple milliseconds. But we're also not factoring these milliseconds that the time you save by having a more powerful, bigger chip process this request. So in all prospects and aspects, it really does not make sense to prioritize having everything run locally with really limited constraints, rather than having efficient data center chips that can be huge in size. And the applications where it might not apply are very limiting. So for example, you might need real-time calculation for self-driving cars, and I understand that, and you can have specialized chips for that. Or perhaps assistive surgery technologies will might need real-time output, and they might prioritize even that 1 millisecond could save something. But other than solutions where you don't have access to internet, no stable power, it does not make sense not to have a hybrid sort of approach of where you prioritize and optimize for data center style, calculations and tool use, and you have backup, local inferences. And so I think the future of Gen AI and computation is completely in the cloud. So before I close my article, I did want to add some remarks on how these AI-generated technologies have been integrated into my workspace and my feelings about them. First, I want to say agentic coding agents, especially in the last couple of months, are extremely revolutionary. They allow me to do so much more and to find a lot more mistakes in my production, sometimes in real time. It has been extremely helpful and has saved me hours of work. You may assume, of course, logically, that this saves me hours, now I have to work less and my workday gets smaller. But sadly, what I have discovered as I work more and more is that these Gen AI tools enable me to tackle on bigger components of a project, which actually leads me to working more, because sometimes, you can't get in a day, and more often than not, because you bite off a little bit more than you can chew, you're actually spending more time working with these tools. Granted, you're doing more things, but your workday keeps expanding and getting more. Again, that could just be my unique experience, but I found the better these tools get, the longer my workday actually gets. So for me, it's been a sort of double-edged sword. The other notion is that this field is progressing extremely fast. The number of papers I have to constantly follow to understand newfound limitations of current implementation of generative AI, or better methods to use it, are constantly growing, not to mention the bombardment of constant new tools, tips and tricks to get better at using current offerings. At times, it can be overwhelming, and it's constantly balancing act between being behind and being informed. I think maybe many are burned out, and we're starting to see a sort of wave-like progression of informed users. So better to say up-to-date users. What do I mean? Well, for better lack of explaining, I have a diagram in my article, but I feel before Gen AI, especially the way I saw the field, you would have someone who's informed, and it's kind of a lot of progression. They would get informed, they would get new knowledge, they're in a new level, and they're kind of up-to-date. Now I feel we're kind of in a wave. We get ahead of information, then too much information comes out and we get really behind. And then we get more information we taught, and then we get behind again. And I feel that we're riding this wave, and the more technology and the faster it produces, this will be more and more of a reality where you have different users at different curvatures, and it's constantly in changing and flux. And more than ever now, you have to stay up to date to understand what's happening. Anyway. I hope, I will be excited to see how wrong I am in my assessments and statements, and especially with how the world's changing. Hopefully I made sense. Try to keep it concise and up to date. There's definitely a lot I didn't cover. For example, the limitations of relying on reinforced learning from human feedback that can introduce biases. There is components that I didn't talk about, such as introducing AI, mistakes, and agentic workflows that then compound over time when one agent makes a mistake and it carries over through your project. Of course, you can also make the argument that could be found with technical debt, but regardless. Maybe hallucinations, introducing inaccurate information and degraded game performance. So a lot of different issues that into. But I want to say that I'm very fortunate to be living in this revolution. I'm very excited what it has enabled me to do, and I'm enjoying learning constantly what this field brings. Don't get me wrong, of course, I love business and what it does and what it stimulates me, especially investing. But I do think that there's been a lot of things thrown out, and it's important for me to write this down to try to capture what biases I may have. Hopefully I didn't ramble too much. I made sense. I hope you enjoyed the article. I'll hear, feel free to DM me to discuss this or debate this. I'm all ears and really interested. Hopefully you found this useful. And again, happy holidays. Thank you so much for reading, so much for listening. What a wonderful year has been. Hope you all enjoy your day. So, cheers.